So my name is Yasser Rouini. I'm joining you from Tunis, Tunisia, and I'm a researcher at the intersection of technology and human rights. I also lead work at Technoloxia. We are a center based in North Africa that mainly focuses on digital rights and the impact of technology on society in the North African region. And I'm also the host and producer of Digital Yours, a podcast that covers these themes actually in the region. So yeah, happy to join you today.
Thank you so much. I'll move to Nashilongo.
Hello, everyone, and very good morning to all those who have joined us. Thank you for CC Hub for putting together this very necessary engagement. My name is Nashilongo Gervashes Nakale. I wear so many hats, but I currently work for the Namibia University of Science and Technology as a researcher, of course, and as an academic, as a lecturer. I have been doing a number of research in the technology policy space from my work as the founder of the Internet Society, the Namibia chapter, but also through the public consultancy that I run at the Namshure Hub, Namshure Digital Hub. So I'm glad to be here and engage on a particular topic that excites me, so to say. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Nash. I'll move the mic to Shamir. Shamir.
Yes, good afternoon from Mauritius. I'm Shamir. I'm the co-founder and growth and partnership manager at Minority Africa. We're an organization that works around solution journalism across Africa. We also have what we called a collaborative news agency where we collaborate with journalism around the continent. We work primarily with minorities. So all our stories that we cover are about minority rights because we believe that there is a need to have better representation and also to change the representation that we have in mainstream media. Apart from that, I live in a beautiful country with nice beaches. And yeah, it's very glad to be here.
All right, thank you so much. And last but not the least is Odamer, who is joining us from Accra, Ghana.
Okay, please can I be heard?
Yes, please proceed.
Great. All right.
And put on your camera. Thank you.
Yes, can I do that later? I'm caught up in something right now.
Okay, that's fine.
Sure. So good morning. I'm glad to be here this morning. I am Odamia Mwako. I currently work as the operations and comms manager at AXA Foundation. I also do a bit of politics. I've hosted a lot of spaces and webinars where we talk about some of these topics. I'm also focused more on the tech empowerment for young women and girls. And that's one of the programs we run at AXA Foundation. That's Tech for Girls, where we teach young women and girls coding and ICT skills to help them fit into the job market. I'm also a student of the law. I actually studied for a first degree in pharmacy. And after my first degree in pharmacy, I'm now studying law. I'm very passionate about women's growth, women's development, and youth development as a whole. So there's a conversation that I believe we are going to learn from each other, and I hope to learn from everybody that's here, and I hope this would be a very interactive session. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, and thank you for setting the stage for this conversation. And we have seen that this year has been declared a year of many democracies, because over 16 and over 18, if I can recollect, elections are happening across the continent of Africa. And even globally, a lot of countries are having an election this year, and that makes this year very significant. And we've been looking at different issues, the challenges and the opportunities that comes with using technology and innovation to to drive elections, and particularly on the continent of Africa. And recently, we have seen the rise in online gender-based violence as these elections take place. We have seen disinformation and misinformation on the increase. And during electionary campaign, we have seen that women have become like targets. Women and vulnerable groups have become target on social media. So my question would be, yes, and also there is also an intersection between how offline gender-based violence and online gender-based violence is taking place. And so many issues have come up, especially during the Kenya election. This was very, very visible to everybody that gender-based violence was a big issue that we need to look at if we must use technology to drive electioneering, in terms of campaign, in terms of people being micro-targeted and all that. So I'm going to start with everyone, but I'm going to start with Shami. I will want you looking at the election that is coming up in Mauritius, and also Tunisia just had an election. Namibia will be having an election this November. Ghana will be having an election in December. What's your perspective? What's the actual issue around gender-based violence? Give us a perspective of what the real issues are from the context of your country, Mauritius.
Sure, thank you for that question. I was hoping I was going to go last, but I just felt that I was going to go first this time. So before I give you the perspective, I was thinking about when we speak about online gender-based violence, we have to look at it from a system perspective. As you mentioned, there are many intertwined problems that comes across. And what we are seeing right now with the rise of online gender-based violence is nothing more than underlining issues that are part of our society for generations. And as we dive into this conversation, it's something we have to keep in mind, that we can't segment OGBV one side and think about it as being an issue. It's all globally there. So there are two aspects that is quite interesting. I'm a big follower of politics, so I've been following politics for quite some time. Aspiring politician one day, if I get the right opportunity. But at the same time, I've seen the transition from traditional politics, elections, that I would say is back before the rise of technology and the use of it in election, to now how it has been, and over the past two campaigns. And what I've seen is there is a lot of use of people not knowing where to draw boundaries in terms of what communication we can have, and comments coming across. For Mauritius, being a country where we have a higher population of women, currently the two top parties in the country have just lined up 10 candidates. That is not even 25% of there's once again here, we're looking at gender inequality. But at the same time, we have to ask ourselves the question, why is this happening? And when we look in depth and we start to analyze like what is happening on there, with online, we get a little of the perspective. Some of the comments that you might see online is women candidate being targeted and being labeled as, okay, you are being a candidate, but you're just here to fill a gap. Some terms that I feel very offensive is like, oh, it's a flower vase, just serviceable people coming in there. And this is kind of like really what I believe is one of the biggest issue around women participation in election, because we are a country that is multicultural. We have very deep-rooted culture to not only our values, but also to our religious belief. And these things come together when it comes to women's participation in election. And the fear that if I'm going to be there, I am going to be viewed in a specific way, and participation is then being hindered in this part. And without any proper control, we definitely have this issue on the rise. That being said, it's very interesting that I'm having this conversation right now, because we are in the midst of election, and there has been something that is really happening right now in Mauritius around leaks, around conversation, tapping conversation. I won't go into the details of what it is, but these conversations have now been throwing the country all over the place. It's like it's a chaotic place. We don't know what is true, what is not. And at the same time, this is giving the population and people rise and no filter in terms of coming across and saying whatever they want to whatever the people they feel. Because one, either they're frustrated with the current government and they're just voicing out, or they're just frustrated with their own social economic status and what is working around. So in that way, without realizing or even self-reflecting on what is being done, offensive language come across. Because when we look at it and we're thinking of who are these candidates, they are mothers, they are our sisters, they are family members themselves. Even if we're looking at male candidates, they have a family. If you're targeting them or targeting what they are doing without a realization, or we're self-reflecting on ourselves. So for me, it's kind of like this is where the state of OGBV is currently. And as we dive in, I'll share more of the perspective in there.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's such a very good way to start this conversation. And it was nice that I picked you first. But I'm going straight to Namibia right now to hear from Nashilongo. We have seen, a lot of inequalities in the way the digital technology is being used, and also in an election. And also, I just wanted to give us a perspective about how the landscape of the Namibia online gender-based violence is. I think that's a good way to kickstart. So we have like a foundation for each country before we delve into the real issues. Nashilongo.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for the opportunity to speak on this matter. Maybe as I get into the overview of Namibia and highlighting what is happening within the country, I think just to build on my colleague's earlier intervention, really to situate that the violence that we see online, and while we are aware that it is particularly higher at specific events such as elections and so forth, is really a reflection of the societies that we are embedded in, that we come from. Particularly given the patriarchal nature of the African society, where, as my colleague Shamir was indicating, that women are seen or are regarded as vessels that holds posts for something else that is good, that is so they're representing for something else that is coming, that holds better value than women. And so it's important to offset from that discussion, or from that background, but also that the emergence of technology and the spread and accessibilities of the internet as we use it has provided the perpetrators of online violence this opportunity to hide behind virtual identities that they believe they are able to say anything to anybody and wherever they are, and particularly women and girls that are in prominent or in visible positions, so to say. So in regards to Namibia, we unfortunately there's no exception, and I think that this is also a general case that we have observed throughout the African region, if I may, that the violence is not is not as much as isolated to a geography. It is not, it's not that it can only happen to women in so and so country, but not in the other. So this is a global pandemic. I think from the UN perspective, that has already been highlighted, that this has become a pandemic. It was much more so during COVID, and the UN Women, for instance, has also reflected just on how all the progress that has been done globally to achieve empowerment for women is starting to be retracted by the violence that is taking place. So for Namibia, this is also the case. We have done a number of reports, and I'll be happy to share this with you through the chats, that the violence is meted out towards women and women in politics, any women that is visible, women, female journalists in particular. And really it is made to silence these women, to make them feel they have no voices. For Namibia in particular, for this year, it takes a different form, right? We have one of the elections where we have the majority female contenders, including the ruling party that is in power since 1990, when we had our independence. So even then, the violence is still very prevalent. We are able to see how attacks towards these candidates are sort of reflected, or are sort of playing out in the public sphere, particularly on social media platforms, where discourses are being driven, and these discourses may not necessarily be balanced, may not necessarily be viewed to be contributing positively to electoral matters. So I don't know, Yvonne, if I may able to end at this point.
Yeah, this is a good point to end. Thank you so much. We have been pushing for inclusion, inclusivity, and an increase in women political participation. But we have also seen that the more technology advances, the more issues women are having in terms of inequalities, in terms of micro-targeting online, in terms of using their own campaign as a weapon against them during elections. I would like to yield the mic to you, sir, they've just come out from an election. So we would like to have a perspective. What's the landscape of the Tunisia ecosystem like in terms of political micro-targeting, online gender-based violence? And I think it's a good way to start, given that we are not talking like anticipating now. We are looking at real issues from Tunisia, because you have already had your elections, and these were very prominent issues from research that I have done.
Yeah, that's true, Yvonne. I would actually build on that point you shared in the past, where you spoke about how we can't really separate the virtual and the let's say the offline world. And I would say in the best cases it's mirroring, but in other cases it's more about amplifying actually what's happening offline. So regarding Tunisia, let me just paint a little bit of the picture, let's say, draw the picture. So the elections, it's the presidential elections, and it happened on like 6th of October, so like a few weeks ago. Usually we have 2 rounds of election for the presidential elections, but this time we didn't, due to many reasons. One of them is like the participation, the number of candidates, which is the lower since the 2011 revolution, but also related to many other factors. So pretty much we had a winner by the end of that week. This is not the most applauded, I would say, by the local community, but also the international community, due to many reasons. Some of them are, it didn't follow really the best practices when it comes to transparency, when it comes to how the legal framework changed just a few weeks before the elections, related to the assaults for candidates, but also for opponents and pretty much journalists. Now, in this election, we didn't have a female candidate, which is, I think, first for Tunisia in these recent years. Even though there were prominent ones, she was actually arrested related to other legal case, and we ended up not having a female candidate. But that actually brought to light that when we speak about online gender-based violence, we are not only speaking about like the candidates, the directly targeted political figures, but also we are speaking of spectrum of representation and participation of women in the electoral and political, let's say, political life. So speak about journalists, commentators, opposants, even activists, and anyone actually sharing on their social media or on their blogs, etc., websites, etc. So it's important to keep an eye on the different kinds of gender-based violence happening and who's targeting. Just to paint a little bit of a picture on that particular subject in Tunisia, there were a couple of studies that estimate that over 60% of women in Tunisia had been victim of online gender-based violence. There's different numbers, so other studies may give other numbers, but what we see like in full picture is definitely there is a lot of self-censorship, a lot of restrictions, and maybe intimidation happening to women online, and the actors differ. Sometimes it's other interactors or commentators. Sometimes it goes beyond to total like whole campaigns happening against one person, etc. And we, through the years, not only through the election, this particular election, but through the years, we saw different types of violence targeted against women. In terms of legislative text, about legal text, etc., definitely, I think compared to the region, Tunisia has made significant steps in that through the years. It's not perfect. Definitely, there is shortcomings of every legal text, but in this particular case, there were comments, but also celebrations when one particular text was related to violence against women in general was adopted, but also it was adopted, I think, in 2017, so it had been a while already. But then we speak about how we are applying it, the shortcomings, and there were a lot of shortcomings, definitely. So yeah, that's a general, let's say, a general idea on what's happening in Tunisia, and for sure we'll be discussing it further in the upcoming
Thank
minutes.
you so much. That was a very robust background of what is happening, and I think it was very spot on, following the research publication work that we did, and also things we have read in the media. So that was spot on, and also trying to also let us understand that women are not just targets. There are also other vulnerable groups and human rights defenders who are also target of online gender-based violence. Thank you so much. I'll move my mic to Odame. Odame, I believe you are with us now. Give us a perspective of what the Ghana landscape is, and also we have seen a lot of heightened tension following the upcoming election campaigns and all that. And we have also seen or heard that the civic space is sort of constrained in terms of how campaigns are done and a lot of other things that go on with electioneering. Kind of give us a perspective of what the online gender-based violence is like, and also the digital space in Ghana as it relates to elections.
Okay. Can I be heard? Can I be seen?
Sure, we can see you, we can hear you.
Okay. Right. Thank you very much. So in Ghana, I think the state of online gender-based violence, it actually reflects like a larger societal issue which is, I think Yusri or something mentioned, she was talking about how patriarchal norms challenge women's participation in governance, in politics, in public service. And I believe that historically in Ghana, women in politics have met a lot of resistance, both online and offline. In the past, where we didn't have the internet, they used to have a lot of challenges and resistance from men and from the society in relation to they wanting to be in government. And even in Ghana, this is the first time where we've had a woman as a running mate who is actively involved in the campaign. And I remember in the 2020 elections, the Professor Jaina Opoku, she is the running mate for one of the parties, and she was actually subjected to a lot of sexist insults, a lot of gendered misinformation. There were attacks on her person, talking about she not being fit, people talking about the fact that she is not married, and where is the husband, like a lot of petty comments, which is in no way related to her experience, her expertise. And many of these stereotypes that we have in Ghana, for example, they mostly want to create the notion that women are not fit for gender leadership roles. More like women are supposed to be in certain spaces and not in leadership. And I believe that, however, recently the resistance is reducing, is diminishing, because we can see that in this current campaign, people have become actually very receptive to the campaigns. Although we've heard a couple of some of these comments made in 2020, in the current campaign, we are not seeing that much. And I believe that it's getting better. In this year, we've had the Affirmative Action Act being passed, which is the good news, although it took so long, but it's good news for us. So I believe that in Ghana, we are having a better understanding of what the woman's place is, what the woman's role is in leadership, and the resistance that we used to have in the past has really reduced. And I also think that in relation to the civil society organizations, a lot of these organizations are very underarmed. They do not have the requisite resources to actually push for some of these things to be done. So most of the time, you would find that these organizations are trying to push for people to understand how women have to be protected, how the society should be robust, how we should have certain policies to be implemented to foster women's involvement in politics and in governance. And where I currently work, we run a program which I mentioned earlier called Tech for Girls, where we are trying to put a lot of young women into tech, so that if we have women in tech, women will be able to target the issues that women face, because that's one of the things that we face in our society. We have issues in policy making, and we have about less than 10% women in parliament. So if laws are being made, these laws would not directly target the issues that women face. So I believe that as we are looking at getting more women into politics, more women into governance, some of these things would be changed. And I believe that currently in Ghana, the passage of the bill, it's one thing that is actually going to push for a lot of women's participation in these interventions. And I believe that as we continue to have these conversations, we'll be able to have a holistic view of how women's participation would be. And then the fact that we are getting more women in tech and more women in governance, it would really push for participation, like participation of women in democracy, and things to get better. So in Ghana, I think we are getting better with time. And this current election, I've seen and heard a couple of sexist remarks, but it's better than before. So I believe that is progress, and things to get better as time goes on. Thank you.
All right. That's a very good place to anchor. And it's good to hear that a lot of progress is being made. And also, the affirmative action that will soon be passed. In Nigeria, for instance, we have the 35% affirmative action, but implementation has been rocket science. So we do hope that when that bill is passed, there will be good implementation and other countries can take a cue from that. And also looking at the GDC, the Global Digital Compact, and in that compact, there's a part that says gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. And, a meaningful participation in the digital space is going to be like a very essential part of the work that countries should be looking at. And I think that singular document would also help us as a continent to sort of center whatever advocacy we are doing around issues that affect women, so that we can amplify women participation, empower women more to be able to participate actively in this the digital economy. But I would like to ask, starting from Nashilongo, how can we shape public discourse and engagement to ensure that the right conversations are held for better women representation, having women being equipped digitally and also empowered to understand how technology work, and also when they face these abuses online, how can they circumvent or combat these issues? And also, how do we also ensure that tech platforms are regulated to be free from these abuses as we push for progress and more participation of women in the digital space? I will begin with Nashilongo.
Thank you, Yvonne, again for the opportunity. So there are a number of ways, obviously, on how we can shape discourse. I mean, as much as the online gender-based violence is being used to silence women, there lies also an opportunity for digital advocacy to rise, to be maintained, to remain as standing as possible, and ideally to work with colleagues beyond our localities, and making sure that there is a pushback towards gender-based violence. But also as human rights defenders, or at least some of them that will be in this room, is really to advocate to enact laws that particularly very specific on online gender-based violence. I want to reflect on a research that we've done, I think, a couple of years ago. It was an 8-country research, and it is published under the common license of the University of Pretoria Center for Human Rights. And this research was targeting a number of Southern African countries, as I've mentioned it: Namibia, Angola, Zimbabwe, Zambia, South Africa, I think Mozambique. I hope I do not leave out any of the other countries. And in that research, we really found out that there is at least some sort of activities, some sort of interventions happening at grassroots levels. Whether it is to empower women and girls, like my colleagues are reflecting on these calls, but also, just really teaching women who are visible, who are in the political arena, so to say, on how to protect themselves. But I think the larger challenge that we were to identify through that research is the lack of laws generally throughout the countries. I don't know how many of us on this call have laws that particularly speaks on the protection of women and girls online, but also maybe initiatives and policy that really reflects ICTs or technology in particular as a tool that can empower women through this discourse of empowerment anyway, whether it is through education or health or finances, just amongst others. It's like there's a disconnect, and that disconnect anyway also provides an opportunity for human rights defenders, for advocates, for researchers, to really position technology and the internet as a tool other than just what we are seeing today, what we are observing today of where women suffers the abuse, women journalists, women human rights defenders, women in politics, but also people within the LGBTIQ community, just amongst others. So lack of laws, but also I think you, Yvonne, you have also reflected on the issue of platforms. What we also found out in that report is this room that is left by the inaccessibility of technology platforms within the Southern African region. I think countries like Nigeria, at least, maybe in Kenya and a few others in South Africa, where I am right now, have that sort of accessibility, because many of the times these offices are found in your countries. It's easier for you to ring up a person without sending an email and these platforms giving you excuses, whether this is through saying, oh, you need to contact our San Francisco office if you need a response to this issue. So we found that there is that void, that challenge of technology accountability. And I also know that it's at some points that these tech platforms offers or issues what they call their tech accountability reports, right? But if you really look again in many of those reports, you are not able to find this is the amount of takedown that we have effected from Namibia on cases that were reported between this, during this and this periods. So that lack of accountability, lack of transparency, but also lack of accessibility towards technology platforms. Again, that report that I was just reflecting to, the 8-country report in Southern Africa, Understanding Online Violence, really also looks at what is currently happening. There's so many challenges. For instance, even your law enforcement officers needs to be capacitated. We had instances in Namibia where victims of online gender-based violence walk to a police station, and the officers previously would just start laughing. They were like, oh, what do you mean? Is this the case? Oh, what are you referring to? Photos of you naked, your boyfriend? Just a lot of those sort of conflated issues that requires education and capacity, not just for law enforcement, but also throughout all the levels, judiciary, but also even at personal level, the education that must be taking place at community level, at a home level, just amongst others. In really shaping, Yvonne, the public discourse requires the media to be sensitized as well. We know that the media in particular, is sort of the defenders of society, or brings this information, or educator of society. And to a certain extent, we also found that journalists are faced with the same challenge. In many of the occasions, they also did not understand, oh, so this is gender-based violence. And that also speaks to how the language that we are using. So perhaps there's also a number of definitions that at advocacy level, at research level, at policy level, we need to be identifying, right? So what happens to me as a journalist, as a female journalist, if I cover a sensitive story, whether it's political or anyhow, and I get somebody sending me empty coffins in my DMs on Facebook, right? That is a threat. That is sort of violence, right? That is supposedly silencing you and your work as a journalist. So capacitating of the media, but also encouraging another very important stakeholder, the academia, in releasing these researches and making sure that they are out there to inform public policy discourses. So there's a number again of things that we need to be looking at here, whether it is the issue of really and holding tech platforms accountable in the way that there is transparency that is beneficial not just for your advertising and your algorithm, but also really empowering policy processes within the country. But also what we also found out, is also that female politicians somehow also finds this issue to be a bit trivialized, or at least some of them, right? That they would rather want to stay on top of it. They would rather, look at other issues other than this issue that is constantly just focusing on them or is spotlighting them. And I think that also makes sense, right? If somebody calls you names, would you rather spend your whole year defending yourself and defending this one issue? Or if you are a minister of finance in this case, I would rather stay on top of my job and making sure that the physical constitute of the republic, for instance, are set. So there's so many of those things again, and it requires all of us to act, and it requires all of us to be engaged, and of course, the new conflation of artificial intelligence poses even a wider challenge that even current policies are not able to compete on. I yield here, Yvonne.
Yeah, thank you so much. One takeaway for me is that you have been able to help us understand that it's a multi-stakeholder approach. We have our roles to play as civil society organization, human rights defenders, as law enforcement, as tech platform, even as government. I think that's a very good way to anchor it. Riding on the back of that, I would like to move my mic to Odamia to sort of get a perspective on how, now you said there's currently a bill for affirmative action in the House, in the Parliament in Ghana. So I would like to understand, how is the conversation currently being shaped such that women can turn up? And this is not about women supporting women, but women understand the role that they have to play and how technology can work for their good, even in this upcoming election. How do we get to center this conversation to increase voters, education around the importance of staying safe online, knowing the kind of conversation you post, what is hate speech, what is disinformation, how do you ensure that what you are posting is not infringing on the right of others, because where your right stops is where the right of the other person stops. So these things are intertwined. How can we center the conversation, given that Ghana will be having an election in December, to sort of combat the spread of this online gender-based violence, especially affecting women and vulnerable groups?
Good. All right. Thank you very much. So one of the things that I have currently seen in our Ghanaian space is that there are lots of women-based and NGOs trying to put together conversations around the affirmative action bill and then what the bill seeks to achieve, and also talking about the quotas that have been put in the bill. So currently, I attended one event somewhere last week. Eve Women International Foundation had a program, and then one of the roundtable discussions we had was on the affirmative action bill. So we had some lawyers talk about the legal implications of the bill, and then how civil society organizations can actually be included and involved in the implementation of this bill. I believe that public discourse plays a crucial role in shaping women's representation in governance and leadership, in politics, in all of that. And as I stated earlier, Ghana, like many other African countries, have a certain cultural landscape. But currently, as we are getting to understand how the narrative around women in politics is changing, I believe that we are having a bit more understanding of the society that women can also lead. Women can be in governance, women can be in politics. And in the 2020 election campaign, for example, I remember that there were times where there's an organization called Developing Women for Something Skills. They created some sort of an intervention where they were posting all the women that were contesting to be members of parliament. And they called the intervention Vote for Women. So they posted every single woman that was contesting, regardless of the political party they affiliated to. And what that was looking to do was to get everyone to understand that it is not that women are not contesting for these positions, but it is that women are contesting and we need to know them so that we can vote for them. And that's one of the things I saw. And after the elections as well, and I'm talking about 2020 elections, after the elections, this same organization and I think there was another organization they partnered with, Net Rights, yes. So they partnered with Net Rights and then they started, it was around the time where the government that had won the election had to bring out their ministers and the individuals that they are going to govern with. And what they did was to put out a list of women that they that are competent, that have worked in politics, that have worked in governance, that have been in leadership positions to actually be put in certain roles. So I remember they will post, say, Mrs. So and so, and then they will give her portfolio. So this is what she's done. This is where she has been. She has worked in these policy-making organizations. She's worked with UNFPA. She's done ABCD. And due to these things, we believe that she can be a good candidate to be, say, the Minister of, let's say, Finance, right? And that also gave a bit of clarity for us to understand that it is not that there are no women to actually occupy these positions, but these are women that they can actually be put in these positions to lead. And all these that I'm saying were done on social media. So this is we intertwining public discourse advocacy with technology. And for me, for instance, last 2 years, I've been hosting Twitter spaces with different political.
I think we lost your audio. Oh, Damien, we can't hear you. Your audio seems to be dead. Okay,
can you hear me?
Now. Yes, we can hear you now.
Please, can you hear?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Great. So I was talking about, yes, thank you. So I was talking about me hosting some Twitter spaces, X spaces, and then we speaking about women in politics, focusing on how women can overcome stereotypes and challenges, both online and offline. And some of these conversations, we had people from different political parties, basically, and we spoke about how the work has been on the ground, like how they feel in, like, they're working in politics actively. Because sometimes one of the things I notice is that we sometimes talk about these things without involving the people that are actively working on the ground. And some of these conversations actually sparked a lot of engagement online, where people were now talking about the fact that we actually have women who can occupy the position. So we just need to do a bit more of advocacy to get them there. And the passage of the bill reflects more or less Ghana's, like Ghana recognizing that there's the need for inclusivity in leadership, and it is a crucial step. And currently we are looking at the percentages to increase with time. So that's how, I mean, when every bill comes into more like when it becomes an act, that is where we now start to look at how we can get women to try to get more women to understand that we can lead and we need to put ourselves out there. Doing more. And we have seen that these platforms sometimes breed a lot of misinformation, harassment for women when it has to do with elections. In Ghana when it comes to politics. So I believe that these platforms have to also set up certain policies to on how we can handle reports of abuse and how we can handle some of these issues during politics, especially when tensions are high, basically, and that these platforms wouldn't encourage people to post negative stuff about women online, especially when it has to do with governance. And I think that some of these organizations, civil society organizations and NGOs in Ghana are doing very well in moderating these conversations, focusing on women being actively engaged in politics, inclusivity. And I believe that to ensure women's better representation in politics, we must reshape the public discourse, which I'm seeing in Ghana. And the bill that has been passed is a significant victory that's providing legal framework for women's participation in leadership. And at the same time, I believe that tech platforms need to step up to regulate these content. And I believe that one of the things, as I said, we are doing is to get women in tech. And if we get more women to be in tech, they would understand the needs of women and actually help to get women to be given the opportunity to actually serve in leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that great perspective. I've learned so much. I think a key takeaway for me is to get more women into tech and get more women empowered to be able to use digital tools. I'll move straight to talk about election management body. Yeah, I can see Nashilongo's hands up. You can speak, Nashilongo.
Okay. Thank
I
you.
can see your hands.
Thank you, Yvonne. And I think my intervention was really just to go maybe with what you're about to raise now in engaging electoral management bodies. I mean, we're learning from countries such as Tanzania, who recently, passed a law, might not be a law, but specific regulations that indicates that online gender-based violence during election time is actually a criminal activity and can be taken to court. So that's one of them. But we also found that, maybe not found it, but also in September, for instance, that the United Nations General Assembly passed what is now known as the Rabbit Online Support and Assistance Mechanism, sort of a platform that allows for women in politics and public lives to seek assistance, whether it is technical or financial in this case. So there are those movements. There's a need for us to possibly localize them and have them at local level. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that swift contribution. Yeah, so riding on the back of that, I will be shifting my mic to Shamer to please give us a perspective. We know that African governments and election management bodies are faced with challenges of creating safeguards to protect citizens and candidates, especially women from abuse online, because they can do as much as the capacity that they have. And also, we have also seen that everybody seems to be in a crossroad of what actually constitutes freedom of speech online and what free speech should look like. These are different divergence, different issues that makes conversation about online gender-based violence sort of looks sensitive. So I would like to ask, how is the civic space in Mauritius currently being shaped to ensure that rights are being protected online, that also we have a right respecting citizenry who understands that the digital space have rules and regulation that governs it, and also how can election management bodies work together to ensure that there's a safe space for everyone while also holding perpetrators accountable. I think those are so many questions in one. I hope you'll be able to give us
I was just
a
going
good
to tell you that
perspective.
it's a lot of questions. So what I'll do is I'll try to break it down into different segments, and we'll touch on each point as we move along. Firstly, I think the most important part that we have to address is gender-based violence. Because looking from the perspective of Mauritius, we do have action being taken around gender-based violence. But for me, I look at it as not being preventive, but corrective. So we have centers that are available for women that have experienced physical violence, emotional violence, when speaking of offline. Why I'm going there at the start, because we have to go to the root cause of the problem. And to understand why is this still going to continue. And when we're looking from this perspective, online just amplifies it. For me, technology is what amplifies everything. Right now, it's super easy for me to be at my desk and just make a simple tweet or a simple comment, and that can really create a chaos everywhere else, because that's how the power of technology is. So if we can't go down to starting to address the problem from the root cause, then the issue is not going to be there. And from an honest perspective, not enough is being done from the government here. Because if we want to really address the problem of gender-based violence, we have to go into houses, into families, into people's place. I was thinking of one action that government can also work around is having what we can have like champions in your community. One individual speaking to someone else that is acting in a way that is not right towards women. And when I'm speaking gender-based violence, I know that Spocky here is around women, but also it is directed towards men also. We have to be like both end. So we have to know that this has to be spoken of. And what are the types of gender-based violence also? Not only physical, socioeconomical, emotional, mental, everything that surrounds it has to be known and spoken about. And we can't do that on just a one-time basis. One conversation will not be enough to change someone's inherent biases that they take from the time that they growing up into where they come from. So we have to be able to address it in different folds. So one part could be the government integrating it into school curriculum, understanding what it is, speaking about it from a child's perspective. Obviously, we have to contextualize the language to not be so harsh and so difficult, but somewhere that you have to understand, like, hey, this is how you have to conduct yourself. And then addressing to now the most vast population. And then there is one of the biggest challenge that I see here in Mauritius, because we are an aging population, is the older people, because they're set in a certain norms and values, and it's still very much looked upon as them being the one that you seek advice for. So they still inherently have this patriarchal notion of how society should work. And they now influence this to the next generation. The upcoming generation are fighting against it, but sometimes it's a losing battle. It's either a clash between families or people leaving rather than trying to solve the problem. So that is, for me, the first part of your question in terms of how can we address this problem. So we look at first gender-based violence and how it works around that. Second point, now let's address the online part. And for me, when I was thinking about this, I thought about how easy is it for technology foreign to our own constitution to our own living, accessing everyone's house. And it is coming across with legal policies, data management that are not inherent to our own values. While if I have to come to Nigeria, for instance, I need to get a visa. I need to find a way to get into the country. But technology doesn't need that. And that is where government bodies are at fault, because we have to put these borders. I'm not saying like borders are here to prevent access. No, but if you're speaking of a globalized world, access is going to be everywhere, but also there has to be a control, because the way things are done and the way the language is spoken in different region is going to be very different in the application. So if we have like a standardized technology approach in there, then obviously we don't have any kind of checks and points here. And even like as Nashilingo was saying, like how the technology is moving forward and the rise of AI, we are in a losing race currently, because we have to play catch up. Our policies are so outdated, so inadequate at this point, that we might reach a point where we no longer know how do we address these things. So I feel like we have to take a standstill and just be like, okay, let's put some filters here on these technology. We're not preventing development, we're not preventing economic development, but we have to be like, okay, let's be wary of how do we address this, and even make this organization be accountable. You want to run your organization here, access our people, then let's speak about how do we put certain barriers in terms of the language. If they're going to do this, what are the protocols? Because you are gaining from our people, but we are not gaining in the same way. We are actually creating a social issue in our society. And at the end of the day, we can't function in that way. So for me, it's kind of like, this is where government can come into action in terms of being there, rather than just following through from these big corporations that in some way, if we look at it, controls the narrative of the world, because we allow them to do that. And we then disempower ourselves in this part. And then finally, last point, so that I don't get too long. In terms of the act, as you mentioned, like what are the current laws in place around protecting women online and around gender-based violence? To be honest, there's only one law right now around publication of it's the Section 46 of the government around if there is online harassment and verbal abuse, that is the way you can be prosecuted. However, it's still very vague. What does this law even imply? If I had to run through this and a case was made around that, I could simply get out on a technicality that this particular term that I use was in a different context, but not in this manner. So we have to really, really define everything well in a way that there is no loophole in the law, which is most of the case every time. We don't try to tighten the law because we want to create loopholes, but we have to tighten it, and we have to ensure that there is no gap there that can allow for these kind of issues. So yeah, that would be my take on this. I hope I answered all of these questions because there were so many.
Absolutely, absolutely. We are just on point, just on point. And for me, I think what jumped out for me is the need to ensure that we have, you know, standardized approach and we don't leave any loopholes. And also, we need to bridge the gender digital gaps. I think those are key things that stood out for me from that conversation. Very good way to anchor that conversation with you on that question. So I'll move to you, sir, to understand. We've heard from our different panelists today. And one thing that has been very, very constant in all the expression of our conversations and idea is the fact that there is need to empower people to be digitally savvy. There's a need for a multi-stakeholder approach, and governments of countries need to step up to the task rather than playing catch-ups. So my question to you, Shell, would be, how can we ensure a coordinated and collective approach in tackling and combating online gender-based violence? And how do we also localize these digital tools to make them accessible to communities such that we all can be speaking in one language, everybody understand what abuse is online, rather than just put it in few languages that people in our on the South community, our immediate community, don't even understand what we are talking about, because sometimes it looks like the conversations are happening in the cities and in the urban centers, and people in the rural communities who these things also affect are left behind. So how do we ensure a coordinated approach to combat these issues, given the background that Shamir has laid, and also how do we localize tools to make digital tools accessible to people, especially around women participation in politics, so that women politicians can understand what constitutes online gender-based violence or not. If I post this thing, how do I think critically to ensure that I'm not infringing on somebody's right, and what I'm putting online is safe for people to consume?
Yeah, I wish I had that one answer on like how can we really solve it from that point of view of how we can localize it, how can we address the issue in a way that actually is delivered to everyone. But I would say always that actions speak louder than words. So if we take a step back and look on how we in our communities have been addressing this issue, whether you're a journalist writing about it, whether you are an educator or someone, let's say, even the electoral bodies or someone who is in the judiciary, etc., how we've been addressing this. And if I take the example of my country, Tunisia, when we actually had many cases that were, some of them were more publicly debated related to gender-based violence online, but others are less, let's say, less commonly known. The way we addressed it definitely showed how, as a community, we are lacking the tools, but also we are missing the opportunity to use even those cases that are unfortunate to actually make sure the message gets across the channels. One big issue, I think one of the panelists already spoke about, is the issue of accountability. So when we say actions speak louder than words, we can have our officer and like officials and everyone speaking, oh, we protect women, oh, we support the mechanism against gender-based violence. But what did you actually do when it happened? We have cases in Tunisia where the perpetrators were actually either in like in let's say in power in general, and where we've seen that even in media when we spoke about it, there were a lot of noise happening when it happened, but afterwards when there were a certain accountability or mechanisms to actually remedy and make sure that the victims are get their rights, there were no noise about it, and it was not spoken enough about it in our communities. So yeah, it's definitely one point to make sure always to have in mind, is that regarding accountability, implementing accountability, but also make sure that whether the perpetrator is someone in the position, in power, or out of that scope, it is also addressed accordingly and spoken about transparently, because that's the second point I want to highlight, that also transparency in how we speak about these issues and the best practices and the mechanism we follow, whether on a local level, but also when you speak about the platforms and how actually, because you see the headlines that X platform is trying, not X, I mean X, but that one platform is fighting, or let's say discussing gender-based violence on the platform with officials, let's say, or the electoral body, but rarely do we see how that is being implemented and what actually being spoken about. So definitely there is more need to transparently speak about it and to address the public. And that actually leads me to the last point of your question, which was related to how can we actually localize it and make sure we are addressing all the communities, whether it's like somewhere in the city or in other places, or maybe in a certain minority or in another. That definitely is more, let's say, I would say depending on the community, but there is a general rule I'm seeing here is we are not putting the bar right in its position when it comes to gender-based violence online. We are in a certain way by accepting it or not actually refusing it, or as community speaking up about it and using even because sometimes even the traditional norms and even the traditional bodies in your community can actually be helpful. Actually, it's not always in opposition to what we want to speak about. Sometimes you can use and get those bodies as an asset, because the last thing we want to do is to make women and girls and potential women want to get into politics afraid of the technology or the political space. So technology can be a huge asset if used in the right way. And if you don't use it, you are losing an asset that actually can be prominent and can be very useful for you. So yeah, the idea I want to highlight on that is it's important to know the specific context of the community you are addressing and the tool you are trying to develop to that community, not only in the language you are using to address the community, but also in the terms of the specific details and, let's say, power of strength or point of strength in that community, and the old SWOT analysis, I would say, the old strength and weaknesses analysis to know what you are addressing and make sure we are bringing everyone to the table on that point. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much, Ishe. I would move quickly to Shamir and Nashilongo. I would like them to still answer a bit of that question on localization of tools, and also how might these initiatives influence a broader electoral reform to promote women and vulnerable group participation and safety in the online digital space. I would like Shamir to go first, then I'll move the mic to Nashilongo. Also, our participants, we thank you very much for staying with us thus far. You can begin to put your questions together and just drop it in the chat box. We'll surely get our panelists to answer them as much as they can. Over to you, Shamir.
Oh, I just want to get your question right. Could you just go through it again?
Okay, so my first question is how can we localize these tools, given that Africa is a very diverse continent? We have different languages, ethnicity, and all that, to make the digital place more inclusive, and also how might this initiative influence a broader electoral reform that would promote women and vulnerable group participation in the online digital space. I say this because, for instance, we have spoken about laws of how things can be standardized and all that. But we know that the technology space keep evolving, emerging tools every now and then. And for instance, the Electoral Act in Nigeria that we have 2022, I don't think they were able to have the issues of online gender-based violence covered in that electoral act. And these are issues of reform that I think countries would have to go through with their laws, with the different standards that they have in place. So how might this initiative influence a broader electoral reforms?
Okay. Hope my answers will cover it. So I think like what I feel currently is we are at the precipice of a major technological change that is going to influence a lot of how we do things in the next 10 to 15 years, and that is the rise of AI. While we look at AI, we can think of it as being one that if we don't control it, it will go out of control. That is what most tech gurus and tech giants are telling you. But at the same time, we have at our hand a tool that can really, 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 if used properly, benefit us in a way that is unimaginable. So just to address the question that you asked me around, like, we're so diverse, how can we manage that? In terms of human capacity, obviously it's going to be limited. But if we merge both in terms of integration of people, and when I'm saying people, especially as most of our colleagues mentioned around like how do we get more women in tech, how do we get around these parts, because it's very essential. If we're going to leverage on technology, we want to have the right people around that. We can't develop a system that is only based on one single person's perspective. Then obviously it's going to inherently have its own biases in terms of how it's going to function. We need to have multiple stakeholders around that. And we have to think around it as being much more as a decentralized system in access. To give you context, what I mean is we currently at Minority Africa is trying to implement a new project that is covered around solution journalism, but mostly around people being there. So how can we get people to be our part of this system? So we have like a tipping system that is going to allow them to bring us news information there, because we don't believe that you can have the whole idea of what is the issue at hand. So taking the same thing and adding it to this particular context, we have to think of how do we now make this much more like an open source access in terms of bringing these information and allowing us to now think of, okay, how do we make these tech platform also unite and spend like a more common front around like what is online gender-based violence, how do we decriminalize it, and what are positive actions that we can take around these things. But this unity is very important, and these steps have to gradually be taken. And then this then can work in synergy with governmental reforms that works around applying it to be able to tackle and work through that. I hope my answer did cover what you were looking for.
Oh, yeah, I think you tried to answer it. Hopefully, Nash Longo will be able to finalize on that. Nash,
Sure.
I yield the mic to you.
Yeah, thank you. Yvonne, I should start by saying it might be very impossible for us to agree now and today that we need to unify the language that we speak about and for technology across all sectors of society. Uh, maybe not now, maybe not today, but not this week, but somehow we ought to start, right? I mean, look, technology largely and by the economies of our of our government at this point is seen as an economical tool that facilitates important things such as banking, such as financial transaction, and all of those things, right? And so again, we are finding trends that indicates that government efforts and interactions about technology at this point really looks at it that way. I mean, look at your data protection law within your country. I don't know how it looks like. Within our country, for instance, it really is business driven. It is sector driven from a business perspective. Forget about human rights at this point, right? And hence, I think our work as advocates, as researchers, as people with interest in technology, to make sure that human rights, including the violence against women, that kind of language must start to reflect within the laws that we have as countries, whether it's your cybersecurity laws, whether it is your Communications Act, whether it is your data protection. That human rights needs to be revered beyond the economies or beyond the economical interests of governing, right? And so in doing that, there's a need for reforming, for instance, our educational systems. Once we get our education system, our policies in education and ICT in education, and not just recognizing ICT and all, but as a tool that that empowers students for collaboration, a way where we are able to unify the language of technology across sectors. And that also brings in the issue of reforming the electoral management bodies in general, and really also positioning online violence as a violence that could take place during elections. We have a case right now in Namibia, and it has been brewing for over 2 weeks, where a member of the opposition political party has been in the news, and luckily, or maybe unluckily, they are, in this case, I think unluckily, they are from the opposition politics, where intimate photos of a girl that he has been having a relationship with have been all over social media, right? That obviously, because this girl works for the media, is a journalist, is a person that holds space or holds some sort of power in informing the public, but also this aspiring politician is on the list to go to parliament next week. I mean, looking at all of those things, that absence of law, even that articulation rather, even within the electoral act or the electoral reformed act, or even the regulations themselves, could be meaningful in this case, right? Where we could say that this could be criminalized, that we should not be waiting if there's a need anyway, which we don't find any need for anybody to be circulating non-consensual images of adults for whatever reason, whether it is within marriage or whether it is in political spaces or political times like this. There ought to be a need again for policies to be sort of reflecting, to be reactive, to be meeting those issues that our societies are facing. And that's, again, goes back again to issues of governance, like electoral reforms, electoral management bodies should no longer be working in isolation, right? It is no longer just an issue of this is an election cycle, this is what is expected. It is so many other things, and technology plays a vital role, right? So multi-stakeholderism, even at local level, must thrive for all of us who are on the call and who are in the know. Engage your journalists, engage these bodies and say, this is how we are viewing this issue. Have you considered, for instance, regional frameworks such as your Malabo Convention in terms of the data protection and how it can be reflected within the management of whether it is now the data related to technology? Have you looked at gender, gender-related regulations that are coming out of maybe the UN bodies that really looks at issues such as the violences during election time and make it a local election issue? So this working in isolation is really keeping, really holding our hands down as a society and as a people, to say that technology cannot be just isolated and be used in scenarios when it is necessary, that it must be broadly approached, broadly integrated, and only then we are able to unify this language, right? I think I don't know, Yvonne, if I've answered to the question, but it's really that. But again, this is not just the time, in calling for platforms and making sure that they answer their needs. It's not just an issue of making sure that we are in touch with electoral management bodies within countries. So and so we've made sure that we've provided them with such and such tools, and this is the things. But it's also proactiveness in revealing many of these things and engaging in many of those things to be to comprehend. So Yvonne, before I close, there's a specific issue. This is something that I've always been asked, and it's out of the ambit of violence. For instance, I think there's some of the regulations within my country, for instance, that tells you you cannot wear your party regalia to a voting poll, right? Because that's a way to influence voters, for instance, right? But we know that currently when I go to a voting poll, in those 9 hours or 3 hours that I am waiting for my chance to vote, I have access to technology. My phone is in my hand. I have a power bank, and I have all of these things. And I can still be posting in WhatsApp groups, and I can still be campaigning until that time. While the actual law, for instance, tells you that a campaign must stop 72 hours before elections. So do you understand? It's really many of these things around technology and the engagement of technology within whether it is the electoral processes, but most importantly around election time. What happens if in the 3 hours that you are in the queue to go vote, nude photos of one of the presidential candidates comes up in your phone? You are already in the queue. You have maybe set out already from your house and decided that I'm going to vote for this candidate, and that happens to you while you are in the queue. You are obviously going to make a different decision, but it is influenced through the engagement of technology. So many of those things, and we need to be keeping this engagement going indeed, Yvonne.
Wow, that's a very, very important point you have raised there, Nashilongo, because that could actually swing an election to the opponents. So people are lashing on that as a tool, and it's a critical issue we actually need to look at. Yes, in Nigeria, we also have that. You can't wear your party logos or anything to the election voting point on that day, but forgetting that technology can also be used to manipulate a lot of things, voters' choices, even right there on the voting ground. I think that's very, very important point you have raised there. I would like us to end this conversation with this last question. So I'm just going to throw it open to everyone. So I'm just going to mention your name to sort of touch on it for 1 minute. We have also seen that, yes, we are pushing for women participation in election. We are trying to see how we can break that inequality that exists. But there is also that low economic power that women face in terms of being able to sustain a campaign, being able to pick their form from their political party, and being able to galvanize voters because of their low economic power. You see, the men folks have more advantage than the women, even when you look at the terms of how financially stable are these women who want to vie for position. How do we begin to sort of ensure that in the African electoral landscape, there is inequality across parties? We are not just talking to government. We can hold political parties accountable in terms of how their internal politics affect women participation, and how do we also that there are two questions in one. How do we also ensure that tech platforms are transparent in terms of release of information on content that violates the rights of individuals on their platform, and how can they ensure that everyone can thrive digitally, everyone can be safe digitally using their platform. So these two questions, you can choose any one of them you want to answer. How can we ensure that tech platforms are transparent? I know a lot of conversation globally are going on platform accountability and transparency and all that, but looking at it from an African perspective, Nashilongo spoke about how we can work together in synergy, how we can harmonize our laws rather than just importing laws that are not fit for the African context and adopting it as our data protection law and all that. Because what we have seen in most countries is adoption of Western laws, just changing some English here and there and adopting it without looking at what is the African context. How do we ensure that what we are putting in place speak to the context of our environment? So you can actually pick any of the questions you want to answer. How do we ensure that this platform are transparent in terms of ensuring that everyone can thrive digitally, and also when issues of abuse are reported, they can step up to the game and help protect the rights of the person that has just been violated. And also, how do we sort of bring women economic power at par with that of the men, such that women can competitively compete with the men and hold political office, because we are pushing for gender inclusivity and equality. We have also seen issues around affirmative actions in countries, like for instance, Ghana also has just passed a bill, like Odami told us. We have 35% affirmative action in Nigeria, but it is not realistic. We've not seen reasonable progress because women do not have that financial capacity to actually step up to that opportunity and level of participation they would want to have. So I would like, we should go first. I would like you, sir, to go first in 1 minute. You can pick any of the questions you want to answer, but I want the two questions to be attempted before we call it a close and look at the questions in our chat box. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Something.
Hi, Yusel. We can barely hear you. I think your network is not stable. Okay, so let me shift the mic to Shamer while we wait for you to fix your network.
Okay, thank you. I'll go with the inequality one, because recently, just before the election here, there was a bill that was circulating around party funding, which was very interesting, around like how do parties get their fund, and how do we bring about more transparency in these parts. And while these conversations were going around, multiple ideas were being thrown across around like how can we ensure that there is a fair election in terms of, even we're speaking here in the terms of women, in terms of participation, how can tomorrow, if an independent woman candidate go forward, what is the support that they can get in relation to running their own campaign? And the idea that really came across that I find can work is one where there is a governmental fund at the disposition of these individuals that wants to participate in this part. Obviously, the fund, we have to look at it objectively because each party's participation and size is going to vary. But at the same time, we can at least give a more kind of equitable participation rather than the way currently it is, where it is very unevenly distributed, where the bigger parties are the one that have all the power. Even if you have women participation in different angle, they're not able to do that because it's costly. An electoral campaign is costly and it takes time. So we definitely have to think of an idea around that where participation is, if tomorrow your civic duty tells you, I want to be and contribute to my country in this format, I'm able to do that because there is a way to go forward.
All right, thank you so much. I'll move the mic to Odamia.
All right, thank you very much. I'm so excited, honestly, especially looking at the line of conversation, like how objective we all are, and the fact that we are looking at practical steps. It's not like we are just speaking on more like just we are not talking in isolation. Like everyone is relating what we are conversing about in relation to how things are happening in their country. And I believe that's a great start, especially as relatively young people. I'm young. Yes. I believe that I would want to tackle the question on ensuring the tech platforms adhere to respecting rights in relation to content and providing a safe space. And I would want to just look at it from 3 different angles. I believe that digital literacy and public awareness campaigns are very key. And we can do this by helping people to understand how the digital platform works. One of the things I believe in is that if you do not know how to make good use of a space, you wouldn't know what exactly to do with it. If you don't understand how, let's say, Facebook works, for example, you wouldn't know how to use it in relation to your public awareness. So I believe that we need to have people understanding how the digital platform works. Because sometimes you go on Twitter, for example, someone would want to be putting out information about a certain, maybe women empowerment, but then because they do not understand how the platform works, they just post it anyhow without hashtags, without using the key mechanisms that are very important in posting online and making use of the digital platform. I also believe that these platforms must be transparent and, should I say, transparent in handling report of abuse. Just recently, there's this whole issue around galamsey, which is illegal mining in Ghana. And currently, it looks like the word galamsey has been put on a blacklist or something. So even when you make a post on Facebook, for example, and it has galamsey inside, your post is automatically pulled down. And I think that is because those that are the perpetrators in this galamsey thing are trying to create, I mean, this goes back to the digital literacy, but then they are trying to create a kind of blacklist so that the young people who are trying to advocate for the abolition of galamsey would not be able to advocate for that. So I believe that if we, the individuals that are understanding that we need to have women in politics, we need to have inclusivity, we need to push for tech in inclusion and all of that, we need to start working towards getting these platforms to understand that this is what we need and this is how the platform should look like. I see that on Twitter, for example. Sometimes we see people tag Elon Musk, they tag some people to tell them that this is what we are looking for and we need this platform to actually be fit for purpose. The final thing I want to talk about is developing and enforcing policies that protect privacy and data. In Ghana, we have a lot of laws in relation to privacy and data, but we realize that it's more like just on paper. currently the elections, for example, some of us have not given our contact to any political party, but you'll be there and then you receive an SMS from some political, like someone that is running for office, and then they will send you an SMS. And sometimes I see it and I'm like, I didn't give my information to you. Like, why do you have my data? Why are you sending me information about your campaign when I haven't actually willingly given you my information? I haven't given you my contact. So I believe that these policies, we have to have a way to enforce it. And one of the ways is actually to have conversations about it. Sometimes we think that having these conversations do not go anywhere. But in my opinion, I think that in Africa, because now people are actually understanding how the digital landscape works, when we have these conversations, now people would understand that this is actually a right we have and we need to enforce it, because it's one point for people to know that I have this right, and it's another for the enforcement to happen. But if we have a lot of people understanding that we actually possess these rights, we are not supposed to be our data is not supposed to be shared with people without our consent and all of that. And then a lot of people understand this. Let's just assume that in Ghana, the youth population is more than 50%. So if every young person understands that this is my right in relation to data privacy or sharing my information, and we are all talking about it, it will go a long way. And we can see, for example, in Kenya, when the young people stood up and they said they were going to fight against, demonstrate, and then ask for their rights, their voices to be heard. And we saw that in a short time, there were a lot of things that were done in their favor, which was related to the protests. So I believe that technology possesses a potential, an immense potential, basically, to help with growth, empowerment, but we need to understand how this platform works so that we can have a robust privacy protection, and then these tech companies can also make sure that we have access. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was a lot of information packed there, and I hope that our participants will be able to just unpack that and use it to push for advocacy, because the reason why we're having this conversation is to sort of understand how the African landscape is, so that it can help us in our policy formulation as organization, and also use it to drive our campaigns and advocacy. So I'll yield the mic just in 1 minute to you, sir, to attempt the question as we gradually bring the conversation to a close. You share up to you. 1 minute, please. You're pressed for time.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you.
Perfect. So they say, like, always start with the why when you are trying to solve an issue, but I think it's also sometimes to get back at the end and ask why actually we are doing all of this, why we are tackling this particular issue, why we think that not enough is being done. And that gets us to, well, if we don't actually combat the online violence happening against women, we at the end will end up with less women represented in our parliaments, less women active, less women voicing their issues and their challenges and their point of views. And what that means, we all know that when you are less represented, when you don't speak up for your rights, what happens at the end is that all the policies, everything happen, all the decisions, whether they are economic, social, political, whatever it is, at the end of the day, they will affect the way you are living your life in the most simple ways to the most important ways to you. So yeah, that's a lot on stake, let's say. That's a lot that we are putting in danger when we don't tackle this issue with the right mindset and the right, let's say, the right not only mindset, but also the right effort and the energy we need. So I won't add much to what had been said, except that this is an issue that is evolving. This is an issue that each day, with each technology, each new thing, sometimes it's beyond what you used to imagine, let's say 5 years ago. Today we speak about deepfakes, we speak about the idea that another issue is that, well, someone actually can hurt you and they are not in, let's say, in your country, or in a way that even the accountability of your judiciary system can actually give you your right back, or like make sure they are accountable, whether it's a person or whether it's a platform in some cases. And all of that brings us to taking this issue not only seriously, but also taking it on like the different chronological aspects of it. Yes, we start with education, and that's super important for gender-based violence, whether online or offline, whether it is happening for in politics and elections, etc., or whether it's happening for everyday user that may not be related to politics. So yes, it's education. So the way we treat the information when it happens, and the way the media, the people, us as a social media users, sometimes how we speak about it. And at the end, also whether there is accountability, but whether there is actually a way to protect and help the victims afterwards, and how we are treating that post the action or post the event. So yeah, it's definitely a multitude of faces to one issue, but we are risking a lot if we don't put enough efforts and we don't speak enough about it. And it's so important to take that space actually to fill our spaces and make sure they are tackled.
Thank you so much, Yusser. So last but not the least, I would like to hear from Nashilongo.
Thank you, Yvonne, and I'm gonna keep it very short. Really, from a technology platform is really a call for platforms to contribute to national initiatives and national funding mechanisms at the intersection of society and technology. For conversations like this that we are having, that are lurking, particularly during elections, in countries where these platforms are not. I know that, for instance, in South Africa, in March this year, just before the elections, platforms came to Parliament, and were asked what are the transparency sort of methods, or what are the transparency mechanisms that you have ahead of these elections, just so we make sure that there is no algorithm influencing voters' sentiments and things like this. But even towards things like research, I mean, how we are engaging here, how my colleagues who are on the calls are able to say this and this is what we are doing, is because of the work that is involved at the local level, whether this is research, whether it is training that produces data that we are able to use for policy shaping, just amongst others. So look, I don't know if if we are ever going to be winning on this ones, but we need platforms to be a bit more proactive. They need to issue and avail those data for research purposes, for our universities to study them and find reasons for why things are happening, in countries. I understand right now, I mean, previously, when Twitter was Twitter, you could access a data set for your studies for things like online gender-based violence for a specific period, maybe a year period, for a very minimal amount. $1,000 US could have been one. But right now, a data set that you would need to be studying for Twitter is mostly inaccessible for many of us in the global south as researchers. You have to come from a university that is well funded. We are well funded by who and what, we do not know. So it's those things for platforms that we are engaging on, that have our data, that can map issues of discourses within a country. There ought to be a bit more of right, proactive and meeting community somehow, right?
Thank you.
Sure. Yvonne, I was just The three last ones on the issue of collective.
Oh, 30 seconds.
30 seconds. And yes, I've already mentioned this. Let's advocate for laws, regulations, and policies that protect women and women in politics and in prominent spaces. Let's engage in that multi-stakeholder approach, not just with technology issues with your Ministry of Technology, but really broadly on education, on electoral matters. But there's also be for those who have funds. Let's meet colleagues, us who are working and researching and advocating and imparting skills on technology and society, and making sure that those funds are accessible without us selling our lives.
Thank you so much. It's been a very, very enriching conversation. I've seen all the lovely comments in the chat box, and I'm happy to hear that a lot of people here today have enjoyed this conversation, because they were very, very intentional conversation. And the reason we have this series going on is to x-ray the research publication we did across 11 countries looking at election in Africa and emerging technology. And it is my pleasure to say very, very big thank you to everyone that has joined this conversation today.